I have a confession to make. I talked about why I didn't like Abyssmare in my last video, but there's one thing I left out. At the time of writing, recording, and editing that video, I still hadn't read Side Nova past the prologue. Since making that video, I have. But don't worry, I always intended to give Abyssmare a fair chance. I wanted to think about them both before and after Side Nova. I wanted to get my first impressions, my first gut feelings on the characters written down somewhere, and then dive into Side Origin and Side Nova. I expected to have my view of Abyssmare change drastically after reading Side Nova, so I wanted to have both perspectives on the channel. And that's why I'm updating you all on how I feel about Abyssmare. By the way, the reason I'm doing this is because I heard that Abyssmare gets a sort of redemption arc, which a lot of people say can flatten a character if it's done wrong, so I wanted to see if they worked better as antagonists or as their redeemed selves. Throughout Side Nova, not so much Side Origin, we get dropped a few interactions that try to make us like Abyssmare more. First of all, the unit they call out and crush into the ground in the prologue is Yellow Impact, who themselves were arrogant and tried to force Photon into the legacy of their producer in D4 Fest 2. This doesn't excuse them, but if any unit from D4 Fest 2 was going to get stomped, I'm okay with it being Yellow Impact. Now, the spoilers up until now have been pretty light, just the prologue and a few stories beforehand, but that's about to change. This video will still make sense without having read Side Nova, but this is your spoiler warning. The next thing they did to make Abyssmare more likable is pretty simple. How do you make someone root for what's basically a villain? Put them next to some actual villains. We get a story where people try to scam Sophia due to her social anxiety, and no matter how you feel about Abyssmare, they aren't threatening physical harm, not even Veronica, to the units of Japan. They're just a little overcompetitive. So putting them against scammers like that does two things. First of all, it tells you what Bushiroad thinks of Americans, and secondly, it makes them more sympathetic by comparison. And those scammers aren't even the worst people they're put next to. Yeah, you wait your damn turn, show, I'll get to you later. Another thing they do is give them Gap Moe. I said so in my Unimare video, but you all know by now that I can't resist a good Gap Moe. For example, Veronica deeply cares about her siblings and looking cool in front of them. Sophia is a flailing mess, but still somehow the most responsible one of them. And, of course, seeing characters that are usually super confident and unflappable getting flustered is always fun. And that's one factor they've got going for them. The extreme personalities they have serve as great setup for extreme Gap Moe. And speaking of good potential, they also set up this really interesting narrative parallel between Cocoa and Veronica, where they both see one of their unit mates as their rivals, and seeing how that plays out differently is pretty interesting. I'm not sure they did it on purpose, but in both the Unicorn and Abyssmare, there's one person who was forced to be like Arya, there's one person who's a complete mess with a special attachment to that Arya stand-in, one person who has a one-sided rival in the unit, and that person's smug girlfriend who gets mistaken for a delinquent. Now, back to putting them next to absolute scum. Sho Mitsuhashi. Next to him, Neo looks like a goddamn angel. He's almost cartoonishly evil, this pile of garbage. For those of you who are watching this without having read Side Nova, Sho is a former member of LMO and the current producer of Abyssmare. What makes him so unlikable is that at the peak of his popularity, he abandoned his unit and his family because he was getting jealous of Shinobu's grandfather. He then found a super talented artist and produced her until she died at the peak of her popularity, which may have been karma biting him in the you-know-what. But this karmic lesson from the universe was not enough for him, so he tried to replicate her talent by exploiting her daughter, who lost her voice at the peak of her popularity. I'm seeing a pattern here. And this daughter, Neo by the way, is the same daughter whose father tossed her aside and replaced her with an AI because she couldn't sing like Arya at age 9. You might think, wow, what a jerk. But that's not even close to all the atrocities he's committed. Flip-flopping his loyalties at the drop of a hat, deliberately sabotaging his own unit before the big showdown. Minus 100,000 Lumina points for you, sir. So, with that being said, did it work? All these plot devices and strategies to try to make Abyssmare more likable, were they effective? They were pretty blatant, and you could tell what they were trying to do the whole time. Like, Sho as a character is basically designed to be more hateable than Abyssmare so that you start liking them. And of course, there's the 40 pounds of baggage everyone has in their stories, but honestly, despite how blatant it is, I have no reason to say no. Just because I can recognize a scene is put there to make me like a character or a unit, doesn't mean I can't enjoy those scenes for what they are. I'm no narrative critic who can turn my nose at something just because I can see the desired outcome of a story. If I said those things bothered me, I'd be a hypocrite, because you know Photon Maiden has those kind of scenes all the time. I can now say, with all the developments they've gone through, I thought it was genuinely very cool at the end when they said the same thing, you know, their whole shtick about winning and being the best, but now you know it comes from their own desire to perform, rather than their producers' ideals forced upon them. So, you might be asking, what happened to all the hate from before? Well, to be honest, the reason I didn't like them is that they were just instantly the best. It felt like basically all the work we saw the girls go through these past few years was for nothing if some random people could achieve the same thing within literally 2 months of their debut. And the way the story goes, I legit thought that their showdown at the end of Side Nova was going to end with Abyssmare winning. And you might think, oh, but Donuts would never do that. But they just did that. It's called Side Origin Photon. Look, I love Photon Maiden, so I, of all people, should know that Photon should not have beat Peaky in that election. But because it's a Photon-centered story, Flirton Maiden wins the election. And since Side Nova is a Unimera-centered story, I had little faith that all the training and evolving our main 6 units did would come to any fruition. Now, how it actually went down is a whole different story, but if Abyssmare straight up won with all that we've established, well, I don't really want to throw this term around lightly, but it would have felt like a Mary Sue. And it's not really interesting to watch the writers flaunt around their favorite characters unless you already like them. So it's a good thing they didn't do that, huh? Anyways, I guess you can say I don't hate Abyssmare, but they're still nowhere near my favorite unit.